Now to somebody who's worked in the former Trump administration and who remains a keen supporter of the Donald, K.T. McFarland, former Deputy National Security Advisor to the US President. K.T., do you see this as a win for Donald Trump?
I think that the jury is out. You know, I've read the White House press release. I've read the Pentagon, Putin's press release. And yet those are the demands that the Russians are making. That's not what Donald Trump has agreed to. I mean, nobody's agreed to those things. All they've agreed to is continuing to have negotiations. Look, I worked for Henry Kissinger in the White House during the Middle East peace negotiations, the shuttle diplomacy of the 1973. And you can't judge the whole thing by what's today's position. This is a back and forth iterative process. What I found very encouraging was, first of all, it was a long call. And secondly, in the White House readout, that they were talking way beyond Ukraine. They were talking about a relationship with the United States and Russia going forward. To me, that's a very important sort of stick that President or carrot that President Trump holds, is that Vladimir Putin has been a global pariah for 3.5 years. He wants back in the club. He wants to be acknowledged and respected as a global leader. Right now, his only allies are Xi Jinping, the North Korean leader, and the Iranian Ayatollahs. That's not a really great group that he wants to be part of.
It's not. But similarly, it's very important for the Americans, presumably, to ensure the Russians and the Chinese are not too close, because your great rival across much of the world is China. So this is more than it's about Ukraine. It's about separating Russia from China.
You're making the best point of all. For our perspective, the American perspective, it's not all about Ukraine. It's not all about Europe, which is the European perspective. I get that. But the United States is a Pacific power as well. And if the United States can draw some kind of a wedge between the Chinese and the Russians, that's a win for us. Because right now, if you have Russian military prowess, Russian natural resources, Chinese technology, and Chinese money, unified and directed at replacing the United States as the global world power, that's a really existential threat for us. So I think President Putin may have his objectives, but Donald Trump has a much more global view of this.
I am, for better or worse, stuck here from a European perspective, as it were. And when I look through the Russian readout, this is from the Kremlin's readout of the call, they say it's emphasized that a key condition for preventing escalation and working towards resolution should be the complete cessation of foreign military aid and the provision of intelligence information to Kyiv. Now, that is a condition, if it was met by America, which would more or less guarantee the Ukrainians lost ground and perhaps lost the war. And from the Europeans' point of view, there is a growing belief that we might actually have to be there alongside Ukraine fighting Russia. And that in itself points to a huge new instability in our part of the world. Is that not something that worries the Pentagon and the White House?
I mean, nobody wants to, especially talk of nuclear weapons, you know, in Europe right now, and that somehow Europe would join in a, I guess, mini World War III or repeat of World War II. I mean, look, what the Russians are talking about, in the United States, we have an expression, there's a big difference between the bid and the ask. And this may be the Russian ask, but it's not necessarily the American bid. And when President Trump has talked to the Ukrainians about not American boots on the ground, I don't think that's a non-starter from the United States perspective. So is Ukraine NATO membership at this point. But what we're talking about is an economic relationship between the United States and Ukraine that could go for 30 years, which would be integrating our economies together. In a lot of ways, that's a better guarantee for peace, because we'd be invested in the Ukrainian economy. We're not going to let anything happen to Ukraine if that's the case.
Guess what? I agree with you. KT, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC tonight.